In addition to being a beautiful country that has a ton to offer visitors, Germany is known for a lot of good things. The printing press was invented there, luxury car brands like BMW and Mercedes-Benz, killer sausages, and of course, probably our favorite thing, beer. Now, unlike other European countries like England and Belgium, who focus mostly on their ale game, Germany is probably most known for their incredible lagers, many of which are of the paler sort. But there are some exceptions to that. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and this week I'm joined by contributor Will Lovell to chat about the classic German amber lager known as Märzen.
I have to say, these episodes are always so much fun because we get to, I think I've said this before, but we get to give our little love letter to this particular beer style and its history and what it is. And I have to say, Märzen is one that I would love to write many love letters to because it is so delicious. And when done right, especially when enjoyed in places like Bavaria, it is just absolutely fantastic. So I'm happy to write this swan song, this love letter to Märzen with you today, Marshall.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. When I first worked up the courage to brew my own lagers at home, Märzen was high on my list. In fact, there was a good couple of years where it was the single style that I brewed the most. There's just something about the melding of that rich malt flavor and noble hops with the crisp, clean drinkability of a lager that tickles my fancy. I still love this style and look forward to getting into it with you today, as well as what tasters thought of one made a short and shoddy style. All right, if you're a fan of this show and would like to receive a little bonus for supporting us, please consider becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live brew day with a Brülosophy contributor. Again, if you're interested in helping us to continue bringing you this show, you can learn more about the rewards we offer over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to help us out is by using the links found at brülosophy.com/support. When you're shopping online, your experience won't change at all, and we get a little commission for the referral. And finally, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what you think about this show by leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, we would appreciate that as well. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having a rad YouTube channel chock full of great brewing-related content, sell what we believe to be are some of the most best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you really do owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120-volt 5-gallon system or something bigger like their 240-volt 10-gallon unit, Clawhammer has got you covered. You can learn more about everything they have to offer over at clawhammersupply.com. And don't forget to let them know that Brülosophy sent you while you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. All right, listener Clayton Latham wrote in with some feedback that I can only imagine stemmed from my admitted undying love of Miller Lite. He said, "Man, I really wish Anheuser-Busch would sell good old-fashioned Michelob again. Now that we are all into lager, I would really love to have some Michelob around to supplement the craft all-malt lager with some less expensive macro equivalent. Plus, now that I've matured as a beer drinker and have expanded my palate to yellow fizzy beer and have toned down my biases against macro lager, I bet I would really enjoy it." Will, have you ever had the classic Michelob in that nice slanted neck bottle?
I don't remember drinking classic Michelob, which is kind of sad. I'm a little sad that I don't have that memory. Like if I did it, it was like something that I didn't remember, or maybe it was just a little bit before my time. It's funny. I had this conversation with a friend the other day as I was carrying like one of the suitcase, like 24 packs of Miller Lite with me. I think it was the guy from one of the guys from Martin House. And he talked about like Texans are described by, they'll buy like a 6-pack of something local and then a case of something macro. And I feel like that kind of fits me when I leave the beer store anymore these days. Like I have a 6-pack or a 12-pack of something really local and really like craft. And then I have my suitcase of Miller Lite for all the other occasions where I don't need to, necessarily have my palate blown out. Because, when you drink a lot of this fun stuff, sometimes it's nice to give your old palate a break.
Yeah, I do the same exact thing. Every time I go on a beer run, I'm getting a case of Miller Lite, and then I'll pick up the latest one. There's a really great Firestone Walker mix pack of all their hoppy beers, and they brought back Easy Jack. So if you like that nice sessionable IPA, man, it's a money one. But yeah, I've been wishing the same for years, Clayton. Back in 1986, before I moved up to Seattle to live with my aunt and uncle, my mom married this guy whose drink of choice was the very Michelob that you're talking about. Again, those sloped bottles were so iconic. He used to let me take take little sips, and I remember thinking it tasted so good, and man, what I would give to try one today, and just to see what my opinions were of it now, as like Clayton said, a mature beer drinker. And just to be clear, I'm no hater of big beer. Obviously, I think I've made that very clear. But Michelob Ultra might be one of the grossest beers that I have ever put into my mouth. The fact it's so popular today really shocks me. But whatever floats your boat, I guess, drink what you want. I have to imagine that Michelob Ultra was, invented and released just to, again, satiate those who want like a lower calorie. But here's the thing. Miller Lite has the same nutrition facts as Michelob Ultra and tastes like 100 times better, in my opinion. So that's why I stick with Miller Lite. Yeah, agreed. So, but that is one of the Michelob Ultra, no joke, is one of the few beers I'll actually turn down. I think it's so gross. And I have to imagine, again, that regular Michelob would just, pounce on Michelob Ultra. And I would love if they released it again. So thank you for bringing that to our attention and making us want for something that we may never get, Clayton. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. All right, don't forget to pick up your very own Brülosophy merch, whether you're looking to warm up with a hoodie, cool down with a tank top, or just look like the nerd that you are. We've got something for everyone. Hell, we're even offering things like throw pillows, tote bags, and tapestries. Prices are very reasonable, and international shipping is available. You can check out all of this stuff at brülosophy.com/shop, and then click one of the product images on that page, or you can just go directly to our Dashery store, brülosophy.dashery.com. We've put a link in the description of this episode. Stop guessing and start perfecting your craft with Brewfather, the ultimate tool for recipe design. Brewfather Premium unlocks advanced inventory tracking, tilt integration for real-time fermentation monitoring, and seamless cloud sync across all of your devices. But wait, there's more. Premium Plus just changed the game with Brewfather's brand new AI recipe integration. Whether you're looking to clone a rare commercial classic or need a creative spark for a unique grain bill, Brewfather AI helps you build balanced, world-class recipes in seconds. Brewing is a science. Make it art with Brewfather Premium Plus by visiting brewfather.app today. That's brewfather.app. Better beer is just a click away. Soon after I received my undergraduate degree in 2003, my then fiance, she's now my wife, and I thought it would be way more fun backpacking around Europe than attending my graduation ceremony. So after spending a week in Riga, Latvia, we took a 26-hour bus ride to Berlin, where we stayed for a couple of nights before making our way to Munich. And while we were there, it was a couple months before Oktoberfest, I drank so many delicious beers, and one of the styles that I found particularly appealing was Märzen, which really does have an interesting story.
Yeah, so Märzen, it's a fun name anyways because it specifically means March. So it's a beer to be brewed in March, and that kind of comes from way back in 1553. Duke Albrecht V banned brewing between April 23rd, St. George's Day, and September 29th, the Michaelmas. So fun fact, September 29th, my birthday, is when Germans could brew again. So that's pretty amazing. And so, but this kind of like, as I read that fact off, it kind of made me think about where Maibock came in, because Maibock means the beer brewed in May as well, or the Bock brewed in May. So I'm kind of curious about that. But they had a lot of reasons to do this, right? Because it gets really hot. And so what do we know about brewing beer in warmer weather and having that fermentation? Well, that high heat could lead to potential infection. More things could spoil the beer, such as, again, being too hot. And then also, like, when you're setting off a bunch of fires, because these brew houses didn't have electric all-in-one kettles or nice, neat propane. They had like real flames. You had a much higher chance of burning your whole brewery down, which could also, in that warm, dry month, affect the rest of your town and burn your entire village down. So they had a lot of reasons, a lot of safety, both from bacteria infection concerns as well as fire hazards. And so he had a lot of really good reasons to do this. But that meant that breweries had to work overtime to make sure they had enough beer to pawn off on people in the summertime.
Exactly. And they, like you said, they would brew these massive amounts of beer from the research that I've done in March, so that it would, have all of this time to ferment and then lager up through the time that they're no longer, they no longer have the ability to brew through that time. So the interesting thing is, though, Märzen is associated for a lot of people, maybe not, younger brewers, because of some changes that were made in the 90s, but when I used to think of Märzen, I thought of Oktoberfest. There's that strong association. So we have to talk a little bit about the history of Oktoberfest and why Märzen became associated with that festival. So the first Oktoberfest was a royal wedding, a celebration for Prince Ludwig and Princess Therese in 1810. And the beer served was actually like a darker Dunkel style lager, not the amber Märzen that we know today. It actually wasn't until 1841 that Gabriel Sedlmayr of Spaten Brewery and then Anton Dreher of famed for Vienna Lager developed the amber Märzen that we know today, and that was really a Spaten. Sedlmayr's the one who is credited with the Märzen, but it was heavily influenced by Dreher because I believe they went on a trip to England together to look at this indirect heating kiln that was invented, meaning that you could make these paler malts, paler kiln malts. Not everything had to be dark or smoky even, because it was kilned over an open flame or whatever. So during the 1872 Oktoberfest, when the standard beer supply was running low, they began serving Märzen to the festival goers, and from that point on, it just became the beer associated with Oktoberfest. But that is until 1990, so over a century, which I think is phenomenal. It was replaced by Fest beer, and Fest beer is so named because it is now the standard style of beer that's served at Oktoberfest. I love Fest beer, so no hate there, but it is interesting. There was really, as far as I know, I think the reason that they switched from, maybe more having lived in Germany, but the reason they switched from Märzen to Fest beer was because the crowds were, at that point, were used to pale lagers. And, there are these folks coming over from, different regions that have Pilsner. And so they thought it would just be more appealing, I guess, to the festival goers.
Well, as one that enjoys both Fest beer and Märzen, I have to say that if you're going to give me a Moss Krug of something, like Fest beer is a little bit easier to get a liter down.
Yeah.
Over and over again. Like a liter, I'm fine with like my first liter or two of Märzen. But if you want to go beyond that, Fest beer is probably a better drinking beer. What's funny though is it's so ingrained in Americans right now that Märzen is Oktoberfest beer, because like usually when you go to the store and you buy an Oktoberfest in America, not in Germany but in America, they're going to label it as that's a Märzen. That's like just kind of the slang for Märzen for most American breweries when they brew their Oktoberfest. And that's so interesting to me that like we have to denote Fest beer as something totally different, even though that is now the official kind of de facto beer at Oktoberfest. So that's always a bit confusing to me. But overall, like, again, you couldn't go any better. So other fun facts is that the other kind of name for Oktoberfest is Der Wiesen, and that just means like the field. And so you might hear the Theresienwiesen or Theresienwiesen. I may be mispronouncing that, but Der Wiesen is just basically the field that they would have had Oktoberfest in. Huh. And so when you're in Munich and you're going to the festival and somebody, angry German dude, comes off and goes, "What's Der Wiesen?" And then you can just point down the road where you're heading, and he knows to follow you, because that's happened to me once or twice.
Yeah, speaking from experience. All right, the BJCP overall impression of Märzen is an amber, malty German lager with a clean, rich, toasty, bready malt flavor, restrained bitterness, and a well-attenuated finish. The overall malt impression is soft, elegant, and complex, with a rich malty aftertaste that is never cloying or heavy. And in my opinion, Will, that is the secret sauce of a good Märzen, is that it's not cloying, but it is malty. And so I've probably made 50 batches of Märzen in my day. And don't get me wrong, there are times where, I just did not hit the mark. And usually the issue is that it comes across as kind of sweet. And that could be, that can be a water chemistry thing. That could be an ingredient thing. But overall, this impression lines up with what I would say is like an ideal Märzen.
Yeah, if you can get that Märzen, like that never cloying or heavy, if you can get it to where you get all that malt complexity that you want, and then it just cleans that clean finish there at the end, so that it just like rinses your palate somewhere at the end, to me, that is just when you know that you've really hit the mark for this overall style, because this beer is so enjoyable when done really well. It's enjoyable when it even misses a little bit. Like even if you're getting some of that sweetness or cloyingness towards the end, it's still enjoyable, but it's not quite as nailed in as when you have that nice dry finish that just washes over your palate and makes you want to go in for another sip. So I guess we should, are we about to ready to dial in on all the specifics here?
Let's do it. All right. So obviously, Märzen, it's an amber lager. The appearance that is described by the BJCP says amber orange to deep reddish copper color. It should not be golden, bright clarity with persistent off-white foam stand. That sounds exactly like the Märzen. I'm probably basing that off of the fact that they are describing the ideal Märzen. But yes, that sounds good to me.
And that cap of foam on top, that's really important. So if you look at most German glassware, there's like a line around the top. I know you and Jordan geeked out on glassware once upon a time, but there's a line around the top. And so when you order like a liter of beer, it'll have like a mark where the liter is supposed to go up to. And then above that will be like another inch or so that is just allowed for foam. So if you're in Germany and your beer like is served to you and the beer's actually below that mark and the foam is like filling up your glass, you can actually kick it back and get another pour because they're supposed to pour it where it hits that liter mark or that half liter mark, whatever you're drinking. And then there's a big cap of foam on top. So that big off-white cap of foam on top is, to me, very important to the appearance because you want to hold it up. You don't want it to be like, opaque. You want to be able to see through it, but you just have this nice, beautiful, deepish, reddish copper color that you can just see through, see the sun through, see your fingers through, and then that nice cap of foam on top it really points it off right there.
Amen. And foam serves so many purposes, I don't mind, like my wife and I went out last night and we finished up at just a sports bar and I ordered a Coors Light because that's the light beer they had on tap, and they fill that 20-ounce glass all the way up to the top with beer. I'm okay with that. But if you're getting a nice Märzen or something, you want to have, really nice, thick, creamy foam to drink through. In terms of aroma, you're looking for moderate malty aroma, typically rich, bready, somewhat toasty with light bread crust notes, clean lager fermentation character, very low floral, herbal, or spicy hop aroma is optional. Caramel sweet, biscuity dry, or roasted malt aromas are inappropriate. Very light alcohol might be detected, but should never be sharp. Clean, elegant malt richness should be the primary aroma. And when we get into the ingredients, you're going to hear us talk about the main, malt that is going to contribute those characteristics.
Yeah, I think this hits so many marks. I think the big thing worth noting is that like hops are not the star here at all. Like this is all about that malt, bready, toasty, bread crust, all those things. Like, but while some of those hop notes are optional, it's not the star. It's kind of the back end of it. So to me, this like just perfectly describes it. And boy, howdy, do I want to go order a Märzen, even though we're recording this in spring somehow.
We can make it and drink it whenever we want, man. Flavor is pretty similar to the aroma. You're looking for moderate to high rich malt flavor. Often initially suggests sweetness, but the finish is moderately dry to dry. Distinctive and complex maltiness often includes a bready, toasty aspect. Hop bitterness is moderate, and the floral, herbal, or spicy hop flavor is low to none. Hops provide sufficient balance that the malty palate and finish do not seem sweet. The aftertaste is malty with the same elegant, rich malt flavors lingering. Noticeable sweet caramel, dry biscuit, or roasted flavors are inappropriate. Clean fermentation profile. Again, very similar to the aroma and a beautiful description of what I want in a good Märzen.
Exactly. That sweet caramel, that cloying sensation should be absent, as we said earlier in the show. And so, again, all these things just line up to have this very nice, just kind of like amber lager that's just going to, again, it's going to hit your palate, and then you're going to want another sip almost as soon as you swallow the first one. I'm excited already.
And I really, again, we're going to harp on this quite a bit. You want the best way that I can describe it is that you want like the illusion of sweetness, but without the beer being sweet, if that makes sense. And I think when people describe a beer as rich or like malty rich, that's kind of the way that I would describe what I'm talking about by the illusion of sweetness is like, malt is sweet. I mean, that's how we're fermenting. So it has those flavors. You do not want to swallow and feel like your mouth is sticky, like you just ate a hard candy or something like that. So, all right, final one is mouthfeel. You're looking for medium body with a smooth, creamy texture that often suggests a fuller mouthfeel. Medium carbonation, fully attenuated without sweet or cloying impression. There it is again. It may be slightly warming, but the strength should be relatively hidden.
Yeah, I think the medium carbonation is a pretty good thing to point out here as well, because we talked about you want medium body. Well, if you get that medium body with that kind of medium carbonation, you're also going to contribute towards that more, refreshing, cleaner, not sweet kind of taste there. Because, if you have it undercarbonated, things are going to come off as more sweet than when you have that kind of carbonic acid bite in there as well. So to me, I think medium carbonation is what it said. I might even go a little bit higher on the carbonation just to make sure I don't get that like crazy sweet kind of aftertaste. But I think carbonation, people kind of underrate how much carbonation plays into this flavor profile here.
Absolutely. And why don't you, when I make a Märzen, I carbonate all of my beers with very few exceptions, mostly to what I would say is medium to medium high carbonation. And I feel like that works for Märzen. But, my impression of medium to medium high might be different than somebody else's. I still get that creamy, again, this illusion of a full mouthfeel despite it not being that way. And to me, that, again, it's just a key feature of this very unique amber lager that I love so much. Why don't you hit us with some of the vital stats?
Yeah, I think the reason you're getting that creamy mouthfeel is because when you look at the vital stats here, you're looking for a 1054 to 1060 OG. So that's not a over-the-top high-gravity beer, but that's not like a low-gravity beer either. That's right there in that kind of mid to upper mid range of, that 5.6 to 6.3% ABV when you throw in that 1010 or 1014 final gravity. So to me, that's kind of where you're talking about that sweet spot of there's enough malt there to have that nice body and give you that impression of creaminess, even if you do a medium to medium high carbonation. And so I think these vital stats kind of give into that. So again, 1054 to 1060 OG, your 1010 to 1014 final gravity there. That gives you somewhere between 5.6 and 6.3% ABV. You're not looking for like an overly bitter beer. Like honestly, it's 18 to 24 IBUs. So obviously you're just trying to get enough bitterness imparted so that bitterness will kind of balance out those malt characteristics. And then you're going to get that beautiful copper amber color, that 8 to 17 SRM. That's just kind of that perfect range there in order to get that beautiful copper color. Like I said, you hold it up to the light, and it's not opaque. You can see through it, and then you just see that beautiful copper, translucence come through the mug, and that's such a beautiful, beautiful sight when you see it.
It's so pretty, and like I said, I've made a lot of many batches of Märzen, and I have, color wise, I've ran the gamut. I've done paler versions, I've done darker versions, and there's a primary ingredient that contributes that color to these beers. In fact, some would argue it's the only malt that you need to use to make a good Märzen, and that is Munich malt. Again, modern variations can include things like melanoidin malt, perhaps some crystal malt, though none of that is really necessary. And depending on, what maltster you go with, like Weyermann has Munich 1, Munich 2, that's a reference to their color. I've used both. I tend to like Munich 1 a little bit better. I know people who make their Märzen with 100% Munich 2. You can get craft maltsters make Munich malt in different or varying colors, or they have their color that they aim for. So that's something you want to be mindful of when you're brewing this style.
Yeah, I would say Weyermann Munich malt is probably close to the gold standard of like what you're looking for in a Munich malt. Again, there are other ones that make very great, very fine Munich malts. There's some domestic maltsters that make really nice Munich malts as well. But I think Weyermann, at least in my mind, for like German malting is kind of like a gold standard. Sure, there are better, but it's a great place to start. And so I'm kind of with you. Munich malt. I like to use also potentially like Pilsner malt as well, just to kind of, and you can play with the amount of Pilsner malt you want to add into there as your base grain, because it kind of, again, drives home some of those like bread crust, cracker notes that you might be looking for as well. And if you use a somewhat undermodified one, you can even put even more malt complexity into this thing by, instead of using a hot kind of Pilsner malt, you can use like kind of an undermodified, maybe floor malted Pilsner malt, and kind of get even more malt complexity kind of baked into this thing, but just really Munich and Pilsner malt, just depending on how you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, keep in mind the color of that Munich malt that you're using. I've made versions of Märzen where I use like 50% Munich malt and then 25% Vienna malt and 25% Pilsner malt. My whole goal being to not create a version of Märzen that does, give that impression of being a little bit too sweet or cloying. And I've had good success blending those malts as well. But again, traditionally, you can get away with making a 100%, Munich malt Märzen easily. You're not going to use adjuncts in a style like this. This is a traditional German lager. Reinheit's
man.
I know. No corn, no rice, nothing like that. And I think for ingredients, the rest is pretty simple. You're going to use classic noble hops. That would be, Hallertau Mittelfrüh, Tettninger, Spalter, or even Satz if you really want to. There are domestic versions of all of those that I've found to work quite well in this style. It is not a hoppy beer by any stretch of the imagination. Again, with yeast, it's the same thing. Traditional German lager yeast. Some ideas would be the Weihenstephaner strain, that's 3470, or Imperial Yeast L13 Global, WLP 830, stuff like that. One of my favorites, the Augustiner strain, which is like Imperial Yeast L17 Harvest or Apex Augustinian. And there are several other wonderful German lager strains. Just pick the one that you like the most or that you want to experiment with, and I think you're going to have good results if you're using it to ferment a Märzen.
Yeah, again, your fermentation profile is clean. So whatever you can do to get a clean fermentation profile that accents the yeast, which in my mind the Augustiner strain does that pretty well on all fronts. But the Weihenstephaner strain, 3470, L13 Global, those are fine strains to use as well. But yeah, again, the whole point is hops are there to balance out maltiness. You want clean fermentation to like accentuate the malt. So this is just basically a malt bomb that we're trying to write a love letter here too. So we're not trying to cover it up with anything else. So as long as your yeast and your hop and all those kind of where you're putting those into your process align with what you're trying to accomplish, which is a malty, delicious beer, then you're good to go.
Yep. And I think and this goes for most, German and Czech lagers in general, where you really run into, oh man, do I really want to make this, is when it gets to the traditional process for brewing these styles, and one being, Märzen. So for water chemistry, you're looking for balanced multi-mineral profile, so about 1 to 2 sulfate to chloride. And that's just because you really do want to emphasize that malt roundness. I don't do that. We'll talk more about that when we get into the next segment. But I tend to prefer higher sulfate in most of the beers that I make. But, traditionally, again, if you're really trying to lean in to that malty thing, you might want to go a little bit higher chloride to sulfate.
So I agree with you on the water chemistry, though. I might favor sulfate personally over the chloride, just because, again, like we talk about all the maltiness, but you also talk about not wanting a cloying, sweet expression of it. And so to me, one way to kind of hedge your bets on getting kind of that clean, rounded, like nothing cloying on the finish is to, again, adjust that water chemistry to favor sulfate. But how about mashing, Marshall? Are you going to do decoction mash on this one, or what else are you going to do?
So here's the thing. Decoction mashing, it's very well established that this was a process developed to increase extract efficiency. And in the process, what brewers came to believe, what maybe they came to know, is that it also increases melanoidins in that wort, which contributes to this malt richness. I talked earlier about, if you really want to do it, you can throw some melanoidin. A very small amount goes a long way, but melanoidin malt, aromatic malt might work in it as well. I hear some people say they do that as a replacement for the decoction mash. I've done it. I hate it. I much prefer just regular base malts in my Märzen. But again, decoction mash is the traditional way that this was made. It can be anywhere from 1, 2 to 3 decoctions. However you want to do it is fine. It's going to increase your brew day time by a good hour or two. But yes, that is the traditional way. And then of course, they move on from the mash to the boil, and they're going to boil for 90 minutes, especially if they're using any of that Pilsner malt, because they want to drive off the DMS precursor and achieving adequate isomerization of those alpha acids.
Yep, I use decoction mashes every time I choose not to use thermometers. So I feel like if I'm going to embrace tradition, I should embrace tradition. So
way to put it.
That's how I go, which is to say that I never do it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah. So also after you do that 6-9 minute boil, you want to chill that thing as quickly as humanly possible, just to ensure you get that nice cold break, and you want to make sure you transfer as little trub to the fermenter as possible. And then of course for fermentation, we're going to want to stick to those nice lager temperatures, that 46 to 52 Fahrenheit or 8 to 11 C, just because we don't want to encourage any ester production from warmer temperature fermentation. We just want to have that really clean fermentation profile, which is what we want for this style of beer.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you get to the part that a lot, us impatient brewers just really cannot stand, which is the lagering period. Remember, this was a style that was traditionally brewed in March and consumed, in April or I'm sorry, in September. That's, you're looking at lager, and it's a higher OG beer. And I forget whose name is associated with it. Maybe it's Narcissus or something like that. But there is a kind of a heuristic that traditional lager brewers use of, determining the lager time based on the strength of the beer. I'm not going to mangle it here, but you can go, 6-7 weeks at a minimum is what would be recommended. These people were lagering these beers in cool storage, caves or whatever it might be, for months at a time. And that final keg, was probably sitting cool for a good 5 or 6 months. So, this is a traditionally lagered beer. You don't need to use any finings or filtration. But I think modern brewers are okay with filtering nowadays, but even if they're making more traditional versions of Märzen.
Just remember, we can't talk about German beer without throwing in the term Reinheitsgebot, because that's just really fun to say, and you should say it anytime you get a chance. It doesn't come up in conversation often, but if you are a truist, if you are into the Reinheitsgebot and you feel like this should be done, remember that adjusting your water profiles with sulfate or gypsum, it's not allowed. Like, you can't adjust your water profile. Remember, you're not allowed to use yeast nutrient either. And you shouldn't use acid to adjust your pH. You should be using other things. So just remember that if you're going to go full-blown on Reinheitsgebot, it's a daunting task. So be careful how you throw that heavy word around. That's just all I'm going to say.
So once that beer has lagered and it's ready to package, you're going to throw it. Put it in bottles, put it in a keg. Whatever you do, carbonate it to that medium carbonation. You don't want it to be too spritzy. You definitely don't want it to be flat. And then when it is nicely carbonated, you absolutely have to serve it in a Maßkrug or a smaller version. I believe it's called a Scheidel or a Scheidel or something like that.
Yeah, I like it. Seidel, I think is how I
Seidel,
pronounce that. But it's just a half-liter mug. So a Maßkrug would be a full 1 liter, like that glass mug that you see at Oktoberfest with the crazy waitresses carrying around like 20 of them at a time. And you're like, how does that little girl carry around all those beers? That's like the liter version, and then there's a half-liter version of that also is very attractive, though less impressive to show off to your friends.
That's right. That's right. Now, I will say that I was looking, I was like, what would some of these traditional American brewer like focused on lagers, these breweries, what would they serve it in? And apparently it's very common across the world nowadays for the Willy Becher glass to be the glass of choice for Märzen. So I'm down with that. That's my favorite style of beer glass overall anyway. So, and it works for Märzen. I'm cool with that. So,
well, and that you don't have the handle to get in the way in your cabinet either. Like, that's kind of the problem with all the the big handles. They just kind of get in the way in your cabinet. You're like, I can't fit any more of you. The handles are in the way.
I know. I actually made, when I had a whole bunch of those, you go to a brewery's Oktoberfest and you pay $40 or whatever and you get the take home Maßkrug or whatever. I actually hung hooks in my old garage to hold all of my my dimpled Maßkrug glasses, because they, like you said, you try to put them in a cupboard and they just take up all the space. So now, what are we looking for in a good example of Märzen? You're looking for malt richness without it being cloying or even noticeably sweet. It needs to drink like a lager, just with more malt flavor. And notable commercial examples are, these are like, you could go to the bottle shop now and probably find some of these. Hocker Shore Oktoberfest Märzen, Hofmark Märzen, Paulaner Oktoberfest. Pretty much all of the main commercial German breweries make a version of Märzen, and I highly recommend grabbing some. The Hocker Shore is probably one of my favorites.
Yeah, I think Hocker Shore is the classic. Paulaner is also a classic. Like, it's hard to go wrong with those. If you can get them fresh domestically here in the U.S., then those are definitely some great ones. Put a little bit of warning, like, not all Oktoberfest labeled American beers are actually Märzen, so just verify that before you go off thinking that your local Oktoberfest beer is an actual Märzen. Some of them kind of bend and stretch guidelines and take advantage of the fact that they can call it Oktoberfest for the Oktoberfest season and it not actually be a Märzen, so just be aware of that.
Yeah, you don't. That is absolutely a good, good advice. I've had craft brewed Märzens that do not hit the mark, and I'm not even sure would fit in these style. Now, I couldn't tell you what brewery's Märzen I was drinking while I was actually in Germany all those years ago, but I drank a lot of it, and I don't recall disliking any of them. Again, these were classic German examples. I've also had some excellent domestic examples from the likes of Chuckanut and Freem, among others, and I've made several batches that I thought were pretty good. And some even scored really well in competition. In fact, the highest score I ever got in a competition was a 44, and it was for a Märzen that I made. Well, a few years ago, I paid no mind to the traditional way in which this beer is supposed to be brewed, and I made a batch of Märzen served and using short and shoddy methods, and I served it to unsuspecting tasters for evaluation. We're going to be getting into those results when we're back from this break.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today.
Like many, maybe even most brewers, I avoided making lagers for a long time due to the fear that was instilled in me by other people regarding the perils of fermenting too warm, and then also the thought of just lagering for so many months was very unappealing to me. Of course, I no longer worry about those things, at least nearly as much as I did back then, and despite the evidence and anecdote, many people still continue to believe that cool fermentation, among other convoluted processes, are necessary for producing world-class Märzen. Again, I paid no mind to any of that stuff in this short and shoddy batch that I brewed a while back using a full volume 5-gallon 240 volt electric unit. I started this brew day at 1:53 p.m. by collecting the full volume of filtered water. Back where I lived before, our water was nice and soft. I just ran it through a carbon filter, and that's what I would brew everything with. I did add some gypsum and calcium chloride in hopes of hitting my desired mineral profile, but I didn't measure them out. I just poured what I thought looked good in my hand and tossed it into the water. I was aiming again for a slightly higher sulfate than chloride, just because it's me.
Well, Marshall, I think we have a big question here. And the big question is like, did you do what Duke Albrecht V suggested, and did you brew this beer in March? Because really, aside from your already failing to abide by the Reinheitsgebot and just use the water that you had, what month did you brew this in, Marshall? Or do you even remember?
Well, here's the nice thing. This is short and shoddy. I did not brew it in March. I brewed it in August, so it was being consumed in September. In fact, it was mid-September of 2019 that we published this article. So, not all wrong.
Duke Albrecht would be so disappointed with you.
He's rolling in his grave, I'm sure. So while the water was heating up, I weighed out and I milled the grains. For this batch, I used 72% light Munich malt, 14% Pilsner malt, and 14% Vienna malt. I mentioned this earlier. That's kind of my go-to at this point for Märzen, just because and the Munich malt and Vienna malt I was using. In fact, I think all the malts for this batch came from Mecca Great Estate Malt, rest in peace. Those were excellent malts, but in my experience, they were much more richly flavored than, your classic commercial malts like Weirmann. So I, again, adapted my recipe just to include a little bit of that Pilsner and Vienna malt to lighten the load a little bit. What do you think about that, Grain Bill?
I like that. I think the Pilsner malt edition and the Vienna malt edition are just some nice levers that maybe not deemed necessary for the purists out there. I think they're just nice levers to kind of get some more of those like cracker, bread crust, toast kind of characteristics that you're looking for. And especially if you're using like an under-modified Pilsner malt, you can definitely squeeze a lot more flavor in there just by adding some Pilsner malt. So I really kind of like this malt profile. I think my more recent ones that I've done had even more Pilsner malt than that, just to make a little bit lighter version. But yeah, I think it's a great play.
Yeah. Again, it works for me, and this is short and shoddy anyway, so whatever. I was doing what I wanted to do. I mashed those grains at 104. Again, full volume mash, so no sparge. I'm not doing any decoction. Nobody got time for that. Mashed at 149 Fahrenheit or 65 C for just 25 minutes. Removed those grains and then boiled the wort for 20 minutes. This was before we kind of settled on the 30 and 30 thing. So this was, 45 minutes was my mash and boil, combined. So pretty nuts there. I added 12 grams of Magnum as a first wort hop. So the way I do that with brew in a bag is I remove the bag, toss the hops in, and then I turn my heat up to bring it to a boil. So not too different than how you would do it, traditionally. And my goal there, I think the Magnum was just north of 12% alpha acid. So the goal there again being to get as much bitterness to balance out that maltiness in this very brief 20-minute boil. At 15 minutes left in the boil, so 5 minutes into the boil, I suppose, I added 2-year-old Tettnang at 30 grams. I emphasize 2 years old because we get fresh hops, and I found this bag that was sitting in the back of my freezer. I love Tettnang, and I thought, well, it's short and shoddy. Let's give it a go.
Yeah, I think both of these options are fine. Again, as we kind of highlighted earlier in the show, like hops aren't the star of this. And so I think a good Magnum and a good Tettnang addition, like again, this will be enough to like kind of balance out all the sweetness that you've imparted to kind of like balance it out a little bit so that it's not overly sweet. So I think Magnum and Tettnang here are perfectly reasonable plays, and I don't worry about 2-year-old hops. In fact, right now I'm trying to go through a bunch of hops because I have so many hops in my freezer right now that I just need to the problems, woe is Will.
Yeah.
Keep playing that tiny fiddle for me. But yeah, I'm just trying to figure out what to do with all these older hops. And I'll be honest with you, I don't really, as long as you kept it in the right conditions, 2 years old, it's not a big deal.
I agree. I know a lot of people really get, afraid that they're going to lose bittering potential and all of that. I have not found that to be an issue whatsoever, despite the science. And we lean heavily into the science. If you are storing your hops, keep them in the Mylar bag, squeeze out as much air as you can, seal them, throw them in the freezer or the refrigerator, you're good to go. So, all right. Again, once the boil was finished, the wort was quickly chilled using my Jaded Brewing. I believe at this point I was using the Mantis, which is made specifically for kind of smaller all-in-one electric systems. Chilled it down to as cool as I could get it, which was 74 degrees Fahrenheit, 23 degrees C. And then I took a refractometer reading showing that it was at a very respectable 1056 OG, which, that's 62% brewhouse efficiency. In my opinion, that is not bad for a 25-minute mash and a 20-minute boil.
Dude, I'm totally fine with that. Like I would take 62%. That's pretty awesome for 20 minutes. And think of all the, just for, as we've said before, just for a couple of handfuls of grain, you could save yourself hours.
Yeah, man. I think it's awesome. So again, 62% brewhouse efficiency, right on. So I took that wort, again, 74 degrees Fahrenheit, 23 C, and I racked it onto a yeast cake. So into the very fermentation vessel that had fermented, I believe it was an international pale lager that I kegged 3 weeks prior. I took that fermenter, put it in my, my cold box, and I just let it stay there for 3 weeks. That Imperial Yeast L28 Urkel yeast cake, with just a little bit of, remnant beer over the top of it until I brewed this. And I pulled it directly out of I think I kept it at 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 C. So that yeast cake was nice and cool. So it did help actually cool down the 74 degree wort that was sitting in my kettle when I racked it over to that nice cold, yeast cake. This is not something that I do on a regular basis. This is something I did specifically for this short and shoddy.
And you can't see it because, we're on audio. We don't have video going on, but I'm just shaking my head, Marshall, because really, what are you doing here? You use Czech yeast for your German lager. Like seriously, you Duke Albrecht is rolling in his grave because you brewed this in August. What if you set the village on fire with your electric all-in-one, bro? Come on. And then also we've gone to the point you added, minerals, like not only just minerals, but unmeasured amounts of gypsum and calcium chloride to your beer. And then you've just basically shortcutted everything to any purist of this style or German brewing. You've just insulted them all to the nth degree, Marshall, especially with your Czech lager yeast. That's actually taking it you're starting to cross a few lines with that. Like, I'm okay with most of this. Then you get there and I'm like, really, Marshall, did you go with the Czech lager yeast? Really? I don't even care that it's old. It's just that you use Czech lager yeast.
I get it, dude, but it was what was there. And that was the whole point in doing this, right? Hey, I got this lager yeast that I love. Might as well use it for the Märzen I got planned, the short Shoddy in the future. I know. You and many people will get this. Lest you forget, I also skipped the decoction and only did a 25-minute mash, and then took this, Czech lager yeast and put the fermentation vessel in my chamber that I kept controlled to 66 degrees Fahrenheit, 19°C. Imagine that. That is my ale fermentation temperature. But I'm fermenting this lager warm. The time at this point was 3:33 for a total brew day duration of, get this, 1 hour and 40 minutes. I was cleaned up and back in my house ready to get on with my day in less than 2 hours. Pretty impressive.
That's ridiculous. I mean, again, I'm all for the time savings, but again, your Czech lager yeast is oh man, it's almost a bridge too far. Please tell me that you at least did us all the service of letting it lager in a cave underneath your house for 6 months, please.
I did. My wife got a little annoyed when I started digging out the cave. Yes, so I had to ditch that effort. Actually, what I did is I fermented it for about 6 days and noticed that there was no signs of activity. So I took a hydrometer measurement showing that it did reach an FG of 1009, which I think is pretty awesome. I mean, when you're pitching on a huge, full yeast cake like that, I guess that's not unexpected. That resulted in this beer having a 6.2% ABV. Thank you very much. I think that's pretty wonderful.
Dude, that's like, it looks like you nailed it right there. A great dry finish with the 1009 FG, 6.2% ABV. Looks like you kind of nailed it. And then hopefully by this point, construction of your beer cave for lagering was complete, right?
Oh, yeah, just hear me out. So the beer was cold crashed overnight before I hit it with gelatin fining. I know, breaking that Reinheitsgebot yet again. And then I left it for another 24 hours before transferring the beer to a CO2 purged keg. I'm not stupid. I just want to be quick here. That was placed on gas in my Keyser and burst carbonated for 24 hours. I then reduced that gas to serving pressure, and I let it lager for a whopping 10 days before it was ready for evaluation. I actually started serving it to people. You're looking at less than 2 weeks grain to glass.
I don't remember powdered horse or cow hoof being in the Reinheitsgebot, so I don't think the gelatin was kosher, man.
This is not a Märzen, okay? Call it what's a Marshall's-in, if you will. This beer, though, I mean, I imagine you're looking at the photo right now, and it is beautiful. It looks to me exactly like you would expect a Märzen to look. It's copper with just minimal haze. I mean, it was only 2 weeks old, and a nice white cap of that sticky foam. Maybe a little bit, little tinge of tan in that foam, but it's mostly white and just beautiful. It's stuck around the entire glass. Just based on looks alone, I'm already feeling pretty confident about this one.
It looks like a proper Deutsches pour. I love how the foam is actually like above the top of the glass. Like if you look at the picture, like it's like the glass I described earlier, where you have like that inch on top to where you, that's where you fill the beer to. Well, it fills all the way up there, maybe a little bit over, but then like the foam is like a little hill over the top of the glass where it just like sticks up and protrudes over the top of the glass. And that's actually probably the most beautiful part of that abominable beer photo.
It's not that bad. I think it looks pretty good. So here's the thing. Before we serve these to tasters, we are drinking our beers and evaluating them ourselves. When I was sampling this beer, which again was fairly soon after kegging it, I messaged the rest of the crew just to let them know that this might be the best Märzen that I had ever brewed, and I had brewed many batches. It had this beautiful toasty malt character that was not overly sweet, and this just nice earthy hop note that was beautifully supported by the insanely clean fermentation. There was no stickiness in my mouth after taking a sip. It was just, I remember this beer fondly because of how good it was. And before we get into the blind taster results, I will just share with you that this keg lasted the weekend and it was gone. That's how good it was. So not bad for 2 hours of work, if I do say so myself, Will.
Well, and thankfully it only took you 2 hours, so you can turn around and do it again, and you got another keg for next weekend. So
hell yeah,
not a big deal.
Just week after week making this abomination of a Märzen. So I ended up serving this one to 17 tasters, and these participants were all informed of the style and asked to evaluate the beer based on both previous experiences with Märzen as well as the BJCP style description, which we provide to them. So the first thing we ask about is just how, we ask tasters to rate out of a scale of 0 to 5, the malt character, the hoppiness, and the dryness or the fermentation character. And that's just basically to get, we want to see what's the highest. Well, in terms of how hoppy, malty, and dry the beer was, tasters rated the strongest characteristic as being its maltiness, which is exactly what I would hope for in a style like this. I know. And it yielded an average of about 3.3 out of 5. The dryness was a close second at 3.1 out of 5. Again, right on point.
Score.
That's right. And the hop character was the lowest rated at 1.2 out of 5. That all lines up in my book.
Nailed it. I mean, what else is there to say? That's what you want. You want it to be malty first, and then you want to have that dry finish so that you're not getting that cloyingness. And that sounds about right in line with what we discussed.
Yeah, and I'll say, back in the days when no sparge brew in a bag was kind of becoming a thing, there was a lot of talk about that produces malty, or you could produce a either thinner beer, or some people would say a more malty sweet beer. That was never something that I experienced. But one thing that you'll hear also about reduced mash length is that you might lose malt character. That was not the case in this beer. And in a 25-minute mash, it was so nicely malty. It just had all the flavors that I would expect from a regularly brewed Märzen. Now, breaking down these separate characteristics, in terms of hop character, the most prominent was one that was rated by tasters was earthy at 14 out of 17 tasters. One taster each said fruity, floral, and this one got me, dank caddy, which I did not get at all. Nobody endorsed spicy, pine resinous, melon, berry, or onion garlic. Earthy, spicy, those are the ones that I kind of would expect in a traditional German lager. In this case, that earthy really did kind of shine, and I wonder if that might be a function of the 2-year-old Tettnanger, but overall, it wasn't an unpleasant earthiness. It was pretty great.
And how much weight do you want to put in on the hop character one? Because again, everybody already rated it mostly malty or dry attenuated. So it's really not, as we've already kind of decided from the previous metrics, this isn't like the bright and shining star, nor it should be, of this beer. So if you got earthy and that's your dominant thing, that's fine. But again, this isn't the bright and shining beacon of what we're going for. The thing we really want to talk about are the malt characteristics, Marshall. So what do people have to say about that?
So 6 out of the 17 tasters, 6 out of 17 said it was toasty. Another 5, so now we're at 11 total, said cracker bread crust. I could live with that all day long. 4 people did say caramel sweet. I have to imagine. I actually talked with all of the tasters after they took the survey. I have to imagine that the caramel sweet wasn't the impression in their mouth of sweetness, but just that intense malt flavor. Again, it creates this impression of sweetness. And this beer was not sweet. I mean, I'm telling you that objectively. One person each noted or rated nutty malt character as being the most prominent, and one person put roast, which would knock it out of style. I didn't get roast in it, but again, subjective, impressions here.
So I guess so I don't think that Munich malt, I think caramel or toffee is an adequate descriptor for something you could get out of Munich malt. It's just you have that /sweet in there, because when you look at it, it says caramel /sweet, and so I think maybe they got a caramel flavor, maybe not a sweet caramel, but maybe they got some kind of caramelized flavor that maybe it wasn't totally sweet in there, but they just didn't have a better place to put it. Because I almost brought it up a little bit earlier, but obviously the tasters brought it up for me now, is that I don't disassociate caramel flavor from something like a Märzen, because I think there is a little bit of that inside of Munich malt, but in the same token, it shouldn't be super sweet or finished cloying or anything like that. So to me, this it rides a fine line, and maybe it's just we have so many things you can select, and caramel sweet was there, and they tasted caramel. So what else are you going to pick?
Exactly. And again, there are limitations to every survey you take, and this just might be one of those. In just chatting with tasters after the fact, nobody commented on it being, sugary sweet. So we'll just get that out there. Now, yeast character, the majority of tasters felt that it was clean fermentation. That's what it was. I mean, it was so clean. It didn't have, to me at least, didn't have any of, the issues that you might associate with fermenting on a yeast cake, which we've been able to demonstrate it doesn't always work great. This didn't have that, at least by my tastes or the tastes of these blind tasters who didn't know that it was brewed, using short and shoddy methods. So 13 said clean. 2 people noted phenolics. I'm not sure where that came from. And then one person said esters and another one person said sulfur. Nobody said wild. You're going to get that kind of a spread on any survey. But the fact that a vast majority of tasters felt it was clean, I felt was promising.
Well, and there was one or two people up earlier that said that they got like nobody said spicy on hops. Never mind. Maybe they interpreted something spicy from the hops, something like that as being, maybe a phenolic or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's where like we have these conversations all the time about, esters, they have this fruit character to them, and phenolics have certain characteristics as well. But like to discern what came from yeast versus hops versus malt versus something else, like that takes a lot of experience and a lot of nuance. And even then, if you are experienced, it's hard to always just totally decipher and discern.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's another great piece of data. Not one of the 17 people felt that there was a single off flavor in this beer. That's very unique. Especially homebrewers love to be the one to think that they're perceiving an off flavor. Nobody picked up an off flavor in this. And the feedback that I got overall, which we're going to get to here in a minute, was overwhelmingly positive. In fact, 6 out of the 17 people felt this beer was a perfect representation of a Märzen. 6 out of 17. Another 8 people rated it a 4 out of 5. So right there, you've got the majority of people, 15 people or 14 people who rated it a 4 or a 5 out of 5. Another 2 gave it a 3 out of 5. 1 gave it a 2 out of 5. Nobody rated it a 1 or a 0 out of 5. And again, this is in terms of how well we ask, based on what you know of Märzen, we provide the BJCP description, and most people have, had this kind of beer before. How well does this represent the style? And those were that's the data. That is just really good.
Not even the dank caddy guy gave you a 0. That's impressive.
That's right. Well, and then the next question we ask is, how much do you like this beer? Regardless of whether it's a Märzen or not, just did you like drinking this? We got even better on this one by just a skosh. 7 out of 17 people rated it a 5 out of 5, their preference. So they loved drinking this beer. 8 people rated it a 4 out of 5. 2 people gave it a 3 out of 5. Nobody gave it a 2, a 1, or a 0 out of 5. This beer was made in 2 hours, fermented for 10 days, and I was serving it a week after that or whatever. It blows my mind that I was able to not only get away with making a passable Märzen, but one that almost every taster thought was at least as good as some of the stuff that you pull off the shelf.
Just proof that you don't have to be a Reinheitsgebot purist to make a pretty decent beer here. Although I am disappointed you didn't get your cave finished in time to lager it there. But I guess we'll let it pass. It only took you a week.
Well, yeah, I started digging the cave, and then my family decided to put a pool in its place instead. So right? But yeah, I was just overly impressed with how this one turned out, and would absolutely go back to this exact recipe again. Unfortunately, we don't have access to Mecca Great Estate malt anymore. In fact, I don't think they're even making malt anymore. They sold the farm. But I have a feeling that this would work just as well with, your standard, big name maltsters, Munich malt, Vienna malt, and Pilsner malt. I have made a 100% Munich Light, Munich Märzen before, and I love it. It's just a little bit more, malty rich, which if that's your thing, go for it. But this recipe and the process that I used to make it did not create a dumper by any means, and it was quite good. So
I want to emphasize that you said light Munich, though. Like, don't think you're gonna do 100% dark Munich or Munich 2, whatever people are calling it, and get similar results. Like that's gonna be an interesting beer if you do that.
Yeah.
In fact, send me a bottle so I can taste it, because I'm not bold enough to do that. But light Munich, if you do 100%, you're gonna get a really fantastic tasting beer, anyways.
Yeah, exactly. It might be a little bit more malty and hard, not hard to drink, but maybe less crushable than this one. But it's going to be delicious. Now, I did have a long time ago. God, Brülosophy just got off the ground, and somebody who was following the website reached out to me. Hey, I made all these beers. Do you want me to send you some or whatever? I said, oh, sure, man, that'd be great. So this was before the podcast or anything. Well, he sent me a Märzen, and he shared. I remember emailing him and being like, yo, these are good. The Märzen is very odd. It's got this kind of back end cherry thing with like almost a sourdough bread flavor. It wasn't really my cup of tea, but that's when he revealed to me that he made it with 100% Weyermann Dark Munich, so Munich 2. And you're going to get more of that toasty thing. So just be careful. I have a good friend who makes a Märzen where he goes 75% Munich 1, 25% Munich 2, and that's his recipe. That's his grain bill. So many ways to skin this cat. And just as long as you're not making a sweet, perceptibly sugary sweet, version of this beer, I think you're going to be happy with it. I do want to get to a couple of reader comments. The first one comes from Brandon's Beats, who says, man, after all these years of following your blog, I still really come away surprised sometimes. At this point, I know I shouldn't, but damn, that's a killer turnaround time on this lager. I'm going to have to give this a go. Again, this was, 7 years ago at this point. I hope you did that, Brandon's Beat. It's an awesome recipe.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, they get a little bit surprised that you can turn around not just a lager, but any beer this fast, especially any beer not using Kvike this fast. And honestly, as long as you're comfortable with a little bit of a warm fermentation situation, I mean, I've turned around several lagers in a very similar time frame, and they've turned out delicious. Some of them have scored very well in competitions, including a short and Shoddy Märzen I did of my own. That also was one of my higher scoring beers that I think got a 43 or something in competition. So
nice.
Don't shy away from it. Experiment again. At most, even if you don't like it, at most you're at $30-$40. So just give it a try, see what happens.
Absolutely. And I think once you give it a try and you do it this way, you're going to feel blasphemous the entire time, but the outcome will probably impress you. We did get one question as well, so I want to read that. Stephen Collum says, how do you determine the appropriate increases to the grain bill for doing short and shoddy? I'll tell you the way I do it. Will, I'm curious if it's the same thing that you do. All I do is I reduce my brewhouse efficiency number by 10%. So if I normally get 70% brewhouse efficiency, I'll design the recipe as 60% and just accept if I get, plus or minus 4 points as being pretty much on hitting the mark, because that's what I'm designing it for. So, you think about what's the difference between a brewhouse efficiency of 70% on a 5-gallon batch and 60%. It's usually less than about a pound of additional malt, and that's all you're doing. So that's the way I do it. Are you doing a different approach or?
No, I tend to do the same thing. Around 10% is that's a good marker of where to go. Sometimes if it's a pretty higher ABV beer, it's supposed to be more in the 8 to 10% range, then I'll try to push my malt bill up higher specs, or at least higher of what my all-in-one can handle, just because I know that I'm probably not going to be that efficient on a bigger malt bill, just because in those electric all-in-ones, that malt pipe, the grain bed gets compressed pretty hard, and so you don't get as much flow going through there. So that truncated time period might work against you a little bit. So I usually will just kind of 10% drop, and then maybe if it's a higher ABV beer, I'll kind of push towards the higher end of the OG specs. Just to kind of give myself a little bit of room to fall short. I think one time that did bite me and I went over, but it's short and shoddy. It happens.
Yeah, it's also kind of fun. I don't know. I know a lot of people don't enjoy unpredictability the way that I do. I kind of like the creative process and trying new things, even if it results in, something not so good. I learned something in the process. And to me, that's just as valuable as having a tasty beer in the glass at the end of a brew day. So that is all the time that we've got on this short and shoddy Märzen. Don't forget to check out our killer YouTube content over at youtube.com/@thebrülosophy show. And don't forget, you can click the link in the description of this episode to read all about this short and shoddy Märzen. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.